meeting is now being
webinar
recorded.
today, or maybe you know, of a colleague who wasn't able to make it, do note that it will be available on our website. The other thing is we are going to go ahead and mute everyone, and we ask that you keep yourself muted if you
all
dialed in
guests
via
have been
phone.
muted.
There will be a Q&A session after the presentations, and we ask that you enter your questions via that instant messenger function that's located in the bottom left corner. So if you can just enter your questions there, we'll read them out for the presenters, and they will, of course, answer to the best of their ability. If you are having any sort of technical issues, if you're not able to connect to the audio, you can also use that instant messenger function to communicate with us, and we'll try and help you out. And so I think with that, I'll go ahead and hand things off to Sumi Mehta, our director.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Happy Monday, or good afternoon to those who are joining from abroad. Let's go ahead and get started. Thank you, everyone, for joining. We're very excited to be organizing this webinar in collaboration with WHO. It's kind of the next phase of our work to really try to harmonize some of the top-down household energy-related survey questions. So I'm just going to start with a little bit of background and context for everyone before we kick things off here. So firstly, for those of you who are members of our alliance here, just to emphasize that this is really very key to our broader kind of M&E system for the alliance overall in terms of the global monitoring that we're interested in doing to really look at tracking progress of the sector as a whole. But it's by no means, you know, the exclusive thing that we're doing, but just wanted to emphasize this is very much, you know, a core part of our M&E strategy. So just to give people some context for why this has been so important, I mean, I think that many of you probably are already aware that the household solid fuel use estimates, which have come from routinely collected surveys, have really been what has been used to inform the burden of disease from household air pollution, which has been such an important part of really generating a lot of momentum for why we actually have to address this issue within our sector. So many of you have heard, of course, that household air pollution causes around 4 million deaths per year. And this is really based, and you can see here the image that WHO had prepared, looking at the population using solid fuels as of 2010. And you can see that all these data is really grounded in information from routinely collected surveys. Actually, the first time that the burden of disease estimates were first conducted, this was based on data where there were only 52 countries that had coverage from surveys that we were able to rely on, and the rest had to be modeled. By the time that the most recent efforts have been done in 2012 by WHO, there were actually surveys covering 157 countries. So this has really been something which I think has got widespread interest in terms of making sure that we can rely on these surveys to actually give us the kind of data that we need to do these kinds of burden of disease estimation. At the same time, as we move forward, we have new objectives, I think, as a sector in terms of really being able to measure our progress, not only in terms of the extent of the problem, but really how are we doing in terms of adoption of higher performing adoptions, and of course looking at the associated benefits for those as well. So you can see here, for example, as we start looking at trends in terms of the number of households that are adopting cleaner or more efficient cooking solutions year by year, we need to also be able to find a way of being able to better track our progress this way. So kind of beyond just the household solid fuel use to really the progress of the better performing options. And, you know, the challenge then is, okay, how can we use these data to better get a sense of how we can estimate the use of clean and efficient technologies at scale? And we're really very excited that we have some new tools over the past couple of years that have been under development. I think the most remarkable ones, of course, are the IWA workshop agreement that's building towards the ISO standards, which are really performance-based standards for the sector in terms of being able to look at, you know, across the range of efficiency, total emissions, indoor emissions, as well as safety. But then also, from the public health perspective, the WHO guidelines, which are really looking at what are the emission rates targets that you need in order to achieve exposure-based standards, essentially, that have been set up. So with those new tools in hand, I think the real challenge and exciting opportunity for us is to see how these are going to influence the collection of routinely collected, more qualitative data on household energy at scale. So the type of data that we can get from census, from DHS, other types of household energy surveys, such as the ones that might be available at national or subnational levels. And so you can see here, these are just some sample questions from the Demographic Health Service, the DHS-6, and you can see that historically what we've had is really information, for example, on what type of fuel does your household use for cooking, with very rough categories, but of course you can see here that while you do have some of the cleaner fuel categories, when it comes to the wood or the crop residues, there's very little variability in terms of ability of knowing what type of, what the quality, and is this wood pieces, is this wood pellets, and in terms of what types of cooking, cooking technologies are actually being used to use this. And really the other thing that's been collected is, whether the cooking is done indoors versus outdoors and then into a separate room or not. So I think what we really need to think about is, as we want to measure progress towards adoption of better options, we really have to think about how the questions can better reflect the range of kind of stove and fuel technologies that we're interested in. And particularly as we know how those, roughly those categories would really map to performance tiers, whether these are the ISO tiers or whether these are the Indoor Air Quality Guideline tiers. So with that, I would really just kind of like to launch us into our discussion today. You can see from the agenda, we're very pleased to have Heather Rahani here to talk with us about some of the, giving us a summary of the harmonization process to date. We also have Ivan Vera from UN Energy Secretariat speaking to us about the SDGs and related indicators and really explaining and giving people better flavor for the development and consultation process. Mikul Bhatia from the World Bank, as part of the SIFA tracking process, is going to give us a status update on the multi-tier framework for measuring access to cooking solutions. And then very pleased also that Elisa Pozzolo can join us to really talk about how, as an example, the Global LPG Partnership has been integrating these harmonized core as well as supplemental questions to really track household energy markets with focus on some of the work that they've been doing lately in India. And then really excited also to hopefully have a good discussion about, really finalizing the core and supplemental questions, discussing some of the opportunities to pilot questions in country, and then talking a little bit about the next steps in terms of the process, but also in terms of the types of tools that are really going to be needed in order to actively incorporate these questions into the SDG, global, and also in-country monitoring efforts. So without further ado, I'd like to now hand over the virtual microphone to Heather Adair Rahani at WHO. Just a second here. Hello?
Hi. Yes, can you guys hear me okay? Okay. Connie, and I'm the technical officer at WHO working on air quality and health. And we've been working closely with the Alliance and other partners, including World Bank and surveying agencies, to harmonize the questions, as Sumi had mentioned. So I'm going to give you a brief overview of kind of what the current status is in terms of household energy, collecting information on that, and where we want to go moving forward, as well as present about a year, almost 2 years maybe. 2 years ago, we had a meeting with partners like the World Bank, DHS, MIX, and UN Statistics Agency, et cetera, to look at the household energy questions on surveys and to develop this harmonized approach. And with that meeting, we came up with a few questions. So I'm going to present the questions and what we ended up compiling based on the feedback of various agencies from that meeting. So that is the building to set as a first step to how we can build up on our discussion to finalize these core questions that we want to harmonize. Okay. So who needs to measure and for what? There's a lot of action going on in terms of ensuring sustainable development benefits, ensuring access to clean household energy and things like that. So there's a number of agencies that are really relying on the top-down monitoring to look at the impacts that various initiatives and work is being done in different countries. For example, we have WHO uses this data on household surveys for health statistics, MDG reporting, and upcoming, it's expected that there will be a resolution on air pollution and health at the World Health Assembly this year, depending upon how the negotiations go up until then. But so it will become more important as we move forward in terms of the health context. And we've got the global alliances. Sumi had mentioned the 100 million by 2020, the Sustainable Energy for All Global Tracking Framework, which is aiming to ensure universal access to clean household energy by 2030. Well, modern energy services by 2030. There's the Sustainable Development Goals, the Climate and Clean Air Coalition, Clean Cooking and Domestic Heating Initiative, and then there's national statistics offices where they gather this data to monitor the welfare situation in their countries and to develop policies and implement them. For example, Honduras is about to launch a big program that looks at integrated approaches to addressing health and for sustainable development that looks at housing, building situation, the cooking situation, water and sanitation, et cetera. So it's important for these organizations in these countries to look at this data moving forward. So as Sumi had mentioned, we do have the WHO has been hosting this database for over a decade now, and the database is one of the, if not the largest data source for household energy. We've got about 800 surveys at the moment, and we got a few more countries. We now have 159 countries dating back to surveys dating back to 1990. And as I mentioned earlier, the top-level data is used for global, regional, and national level assessments. And we're currently expanding this database to include fuels and devices for heating and lighting, or supplementing primary cooking fuels, and et cetera. So in the past, as Sumi had mentioned, these are just some sample pictures that I took from various surveys, and you can see the varying level of detail that we have on survey questions. For example, here, this is, I believe, a DHS, where they actually took they have quite an extensive amount of questions looking at primary and secondary cooking fuel, where cooking's done, as well as trying to assess what type of stove type is used. Whereas you have another, this is from, I believe, a census, where we can't get a lot of data and for health or for other monitoring of environmental or developmental impacts, such as what do you primarily prepare food? Because we know anything about the fuel technology, it's a combination that's important, and et cetera. So we really need to think about how we can really work across agencies and across surveys to have a complete set of questions to get the most out of most information we can for the health and developmental and environmental impacts from the household energy use. This is the total aim of this project. And in the past, as we had mentioned, what has been measured is we have primary fuel type is by far the most common indicator collected on various surveys and censuses. We have we have some by individual fuel types, and then we also have fuel categories, which presents a lot of challenge, the solid versus clean fuel. Often what people define as solid and what people define as clean are very different depending upon the country and the particular survey. So as moving forward, we really want to look at how we can really synchronize what data is collected and how it's collected and how it's reported. Some other information that we have, not to the extent that we have as primary cooking fuel, but we do have information in the database and on surveys on cooking practices such as stove type. But as mentioned before, this is a very rudimentary way of categorizing stove, and with this new information that we have, which I'll explain later, I think we can really, and different initiatives going on, we can really enhance that and really help to understand the environmental and health impacts and development impacts from that. We have things related to cooking stove location. We have, and also based on residency and district, urban versus rural. And we have mother's education and wealth quintile, all of which are very important in a variety of contexts in looking at the impacts of household energy. And so why now? What is the important thing about now? What is it that we're moving forward with? So there's a whole variety of different things that are happening all at once, and this is a great opportunity, and this is why the Global Alliance and WHO finds this, we really want to harness this in the fact that we want to capture and take this opportunity to synchronize everyone to really gather, to improve the data collection efforts and harmonize the questions and how the responses so that we can gather more information to monitor and track the progress related to household energy. To begin with, and I'll go into a little more details, as Cindy had mentioned, recently WHO released their first ever guidelines for indoor air quality from household fuel combustion, which gives specific targets for emissions and talks about the fuels and technologies that need to be used in the home to protect health. she mentioned the ISO and IWA, the IWA standards that are going to be going to ISO, development of ISO standards for energy. And we have, like, as we were going to hear from Nicole later, the Sustainable Energy for All multi-tier tracking framework, which helps us gather more data both at a national and more regional level and perhaps global level of the different stoves and technologies using, and looks closer at things like the availability of fuels, the cost of fuels, and the reliability of what household energy options are being used and how they can perpetuate. We also have a great and exciting thing regarding the Global Alliance for Clean Cookstoves Clean Cooking Catalog, which helps us really gather information that can feed in to a more detailed approach. If we can get some more basic information on household surveys that can help us really gather understand the health impacts and the environment impacts and things from the choices that are being used in home for cooking. And then we have and then we'll hopefully hear from Mr. Ivan Vera later about the post-2015 sustainable energy, which is one on access for cooking or ideally all energy use, including electricity. Well, I quickly want to just give you a sense. We've mentioned these indoor air quality guidelines for household fuel combustion, but what exactly does that mean? Well, basically, these guidelines have came out with 4 recommendations, 3 of which are very important for and can be really enhanced by improving our top-down monitoring on household surveys. And this is just part of this recommendation. One of the examples is emission rate targets. So if we know the fuels and technologies being used, the combinations being used in homes, we can really actually figure out whether they are being clean and whether they will protect health. And so with this, if we can really start gathering information in a coordinated approach on the technologies being used in combination with the fuels, we can really better understand the health impact related to from household energy. And top-down surveys is an excellent place where we could do that. And similarly, we also just realized we haven't just realized that we have come out with a recent recommendation that unprocessed coal should not be used as a household fuel. So this means that we really need to gather, and as well as kerosene, household combustion of kerosene is discouraged. So both of these recommendations require that we get more information and more consistent information on the individual fuels that are being used. Like I mentioned earlier, in a lot of top-down surveys that have come around, well, not a lot, but a significant amount, often countries or surveys report kind of aggregated fuel categories, such as dirty fuels is one, and clean fuels, or liquid and gaseous fuels, and which can often, when they have liquid and gaseous, it's defined to include kerosene, and sometimes it excludes kerosene. So it depends. So we really need some consistency and some more disaggregated data to really understand the health impacts and how we can really design interventions and implement them accordingly to protect health. And as moving forward, as I mentioned earlier, WHO has been reporting disease burden statistics related to household air pollution or indoor air pollution, what was previously named, for MDG reporting and several other global initiative reporting issues, as well as our World Health statistics. However, as we've learned with these new guidelines, we're going to start and all the impacts that various fuels, specific fuels, and the combination of fuels and technology have on health, we're going to start reporting rather than the percent of population primarily relying on solid fuels for cooking. We're transitioning to a more detailed approach that can tell us more about actually the health impacts without having to make so many assumptions in terms of what that means for health. So for moving forward, we will be reporting things on percentage of households primarily relying on cleaning fuels and technologies. And the clean is going to be defined by WHO guidelines on indoor air quality for household fuel combustion, because we do have the information on the fuels and the performance of the technologies needed. So this allows us, at least at the beginning, we'll be reporting a lot. In this category will be a lot of the LPG, natural gas, electricity, solar cookers. But as this leaves open the space for transitioning as more advanced biomass combustion stoves become available, that they too, once we have the performance in field and laboratory studies, that those two and the reported on surveys, those can be put into this category of clean fuels and technologies, which makes it more open-ended and allows us to really incorporate new technologies moving forward. The second category, the percentage of households were primarily relying on polluting fuels and technologies, this is going to be essentially what we've been reporting as solid fuel use, population relying on solid fuels, but we're going to be adding the kerosene in here. WHO is just now starting work to really model the kerosene aspect out of household surveys so that we can really see the percentage of the population relying on kerosene. The first step is going to be on cooking, but as we transition more, we hope to be including heating and lighting in these estimates as well. And then finally is what we've been doing for over a decade now, and that's reporting on the percentage of households primarily relying on solid fuels, which will just be solid fuels. And as we learn more about the technologies that households, as we gather more data and we learn more about the biomass stoves, in the future, if one becomes available that meets the WHO standards for emission rate targets, we'll be able to actually extract those households reporting the combination of solid fuels with these more advanced stoves into the category above. So basically, we're providing a more disaggregated approach to monitoring so that we can really understand the impacts more moving forward. And so this is where we need the help of all the surveying agencies and various other implementing partners to gather this information for us to help us really report better. So from our last consultation a couple years back at the Global Alliance with various surveying agencies and partners, we decided on some important things that need to measure. And specifically, I've mentioned a few of these earlier, individual fuels. So we need to know specifically, we just don't need a big chunk of biomass fuels because there's different health aspects related. For example, between the use of wood and charcoal, there's different levels of pollutants that come out, and there's different safety risks associated. So we need to be really providing more systematic and disaggregated reporting of fuel type. And we have to look at the cooking fuel and stove stacking. We know from research showing us that and the guidelines state this specifically, that we need to be looking at all the fuels and technologies used in the home. There's often cases where a household may be using LPG, which can be considered a clean fuel, 52% of the time, but the rest of the 48% of the time they may be using an open fire in combination with kerosene, these various things. So we need to really kind of work to capture at least more than just the primary fuel use alone, but rather some of the secondary stoves used for cooking, fuels and stoves used for cooking. And similarly, we were not going to get the health benefits and the environmental benefits if we can't reduce, also look at the heating and lighting aspect, because both heating and lighting fuels and technologies can be very polluting and can really counteract or minimize or nullify any potential benefit that clean cooking fuel being used all the time could provide. So we need to be gathering more data on this. And I know the Global Tracking Framework for Sustainable Energy for all started this, and we at WHO have been for over a year now started collecting heating and lighting fuel surveys as well, and we'll be making this data available. And then as we move forward, hope to be reporting on this more extensively. We also need to look at characteristics of the stoves, such as their motion, such as how many pots can cook on. Is it a portable stove? Does it have a chimney? Does it have a hood? These types of things are very important when we're looking at the health aspects. And then we want to look at other impacts, because it's not only about the health and it's not only about the emissions, but there's a lot of other external impacts associated with household energy use, such as the time savings. Some women spend many, many hours going and collecting solid fuel, but perhaps if they have a local vendor nearby selling processed biomass fuel that's not too expensive, they don't have to travel and collect the fuel, that might be another alternative. Or if they have, for example, the small LPG canisters nearby, that they don't have to go hours to collect, or they don't have to spend a long time carrying it back because it's very heavy. Other important aspects include the affordability of fuel, the availability. Is the fuel always available? For example, like I mentioned, the processed biomass fuels. Some of these advanced combustion stoves require processed fuels, basically in the form of fuel pellets. But we need to really look at the availability of such fuels for a long-term sustained adoption of these cleaner technologies. And then there's other things such as the safety risks. As we know, household fuel use for various end-use activities is an important source of burns, scalds, and even poisonings in relation to kerosene. So there were the results of our previous consultation where we had these various surveying agencies. There was a list of 5, well, it ended up being 6 core questions because one was broken down. But there was a proposed list of core questions. So when we're saying core questions, we're thinking of the basic questions, the harmonized questions that can replace many of the questions that, or it's just many of the questions that are asked already on DHS, MIX, and these other surveys, LSMS, et cetera. Or it's just a fine-tuning of these questions. To just articulate them slightly can actually make a big difference in what information we can have in terms and how we can interpret that information for estimating the impacts that household energy has on development and health. One would be for example, primary cooking fuel. We need to really think about specific categories that would include both processed and unprocessed biomass fuels. And we need to look at the secondary fuels and technologies used for cooking. So some suggestions were that we check all that apply, or that we rank those, because it's often not just 2 technologies, but there's a number. So it would be very important for us to see all the various things that are going on in the home to really understand these various impacts. And then we look at the primary heating fuel. And some have suggested the same as cooking fuel, or check all others that apply. So there's different ways of collecting this information. This is what we want to get your feedback on now, so that we can really come up with and propose the harmonized approach for various agencies and countries and implementing partners to use as they develop their monitoring and for their reporting systems. And then we've got the type of cook stove. So we have various different cook stoves. We've got the manufactured, we've got the self-made, but we have the artisanal. And so looking at what kind of cook stoves are used in a region are important, and it also helps us decide what is a more appropriate approach for implementing cleaner technologies in an area, and what actors that we need to be speaking with. Do we need to be speaking with, if we're addressing in rural Ghana, do we need to be speaking to manufacturer to help disseminate and get a supply chain going to of advanced biomass combustion stoves, for example, to the Ghana rural areas? Or do we need to be speaking with, perhaps some of those artisanal, those people developing, artisans producing stoves, and maybe looking at how we can enhance the combustion efficiency of their stove to improve their emissions, the reduction in their emissions? And then we have to look at some of the characteristics in the main stove, such as I mentioned earlier, the portable, the fixed chimney, the number of pots, etc. So here are some secondary questions and modules that were proposed, looking at kerosene. We're going to look at fuel cost, availability of fuel, lighting fuel technology, time spent collecting, many of the aspects that I said earlier that are important to consider. So I'm now going to present you with the sample core questions that came from this consultation that we had earlier. It didn't come out this way. It's got a little messed up, bundled up funny when I sent over the slides. So we're going to go through these questions, and hopefully we'll get your feedback on what you think is feasible, what doesn't work with these questions, and what have you. So one of the first is that we want to enhance is what is the primary or main cooking fuel or energy source used? And we say energy source because often surveys, they can forget electricity, as that's a special type of energy source. Solar cook stoves are important to consider. So we need to really think about these fuel categories and ensure that they're in an appropriate way. As you can see, the proposed fuel categories do increase. We did decide to include a specific fuel category for processed biomass because the emissions and the combustion efficiency of processed biomass is very different from that of wood. Also in terms of the economic aspects and what is the affordability and what have you, if processed biomass is out of it, we need to find out its price range and if it's appropriate for the local environment. The next sample core question that was put together. So that, again, these are the questions that we decided on would be great so that we could start to develop this harmonized use of questions on these surveys, these national household surveys. And so our secondary cooking fuel, so what is your secondary cooking fuel or energy source is the second question. And again, we have the processed biomass included, and we have the different options. We have already seen that in 1 or 2 recent DHS, they did include what is all cooking fuels, or I think that was the question, used in your home. And so it was a check all that you can apply. in terms of health, that's a bit tricky in trying to actually estimate the impact. So what will be helpful is either if we delineated to just a secondary cooking fuel or energy source, or if we put the secondary cooking, what are all cooking fuels and energy sources, and then rank them in the proper and how often they're used in comparison to other fuels. These types of things are things that we need to. We hope that we can get your input on during the discussion. Fuels or energy sources are used for cooking, and then it's check all that apply. It's similar to what it is. So we could delineate, as mentioned before. I'm going to quickly go back, as we just look at secondary, and then to catch the tertiary fuels and technologies used, that we have this category, where this question where we look at all other fuels and energy sources used for cooking, so that we at least get the primary, secondary, specific, and then these more tertiary, we can at least get a lump sum and a better understanding of what all the different fuels and technologies in the home are being used. And then we have, the fourth question was, tell me about the primary and main cook stove used in this home, and which of these describes the stove. We can also get, these are some suggested options, but specific brand names perhaps, or common stoves, you know. For example, we could have a specifically rocket stove. Is there a rocket stove used a lot in your region? Then we should maybe include that category, because if that's in combination with our with the ISO standards and or the Clean Cooking Catalog provided by the Global Alliance, this will really help us estimate the emissions and better understand the and health and development impacts from those choices of household energy. And then again, as I mentioned before, it's not just the cooking that leads to health. In many countries, and it's not just in cold, mountainous regions, but in other places, at night it gets quite chilly in some places, and the heating is needed. So it's important to consider what is the heating fuels being used. So we thought, you know, what is your primary heating fuel? And so we can say, is it the same as your primary cooking fuel? And here's some other of the options that I've come across looking at various surveys. And then there's not a lot of data being collected on the primary heating fuel. So this will have to be refined, and this is where we're going to need input from various partners to help us refine these categories, or make a more exhaustive list that countries can choose to monitor to their specific location based on the characteristics of their population. And then we have another question: what is your primary source of energy for lighting? In many cases, people often assume if the household has access to electricity, then they're using electricity for lighting, but that is often not the case, because in the case, electricity can be very expensive, and so they use electricity for things that they really can only use electricity for, whereas, for example, a TV or a radio or something, and so then they supplement their lighting with something else, like kerosene lamps, because kerosene is cheaper than electricity, or it's more reliable or consistent, or the electricity isn't available in the evenings when they would need to turn the lights on. So it's important that we do gather information on lighting, because we know this is important. I know, for example, in many sub-Saharan African countries, about 80% of the population is relying on kerosene for lighting, so it's important. And there's a substantial difference between the technologies used for lighting. For kerosene wick and pressurized, there's different emissions associated with each technology. So by adding one or two additional answer options, or articulating those answer options to be more specific, can tell us a lot of information. Here are some of the supplemental questions that were also proposed. So those are the 6 core questions that we hope to refine today and develop a finalized set that we can submit perhaps to the International Household Survey Network, and we can want agencies to include. But in additional questions, if there is the options, for example, the multi-tier framework I know has quite a substantial energy module, and some of the supplemental questions that we'd like to see assessed by various partners would be, what is your secondary source for lighting? In addition, for example, they may use primarily electricity, but that could be 60% of the time, and the rest of the time they're using kerosene. So it's important to know secondary source of energy for heating, and then the fuel collection aspect, because that impacts the well-being, that impacts perhaps families. Their children are collecting fuel instead of going to school. The women are collecting fuel instead of doing something that could produce income for their household, et cetera. And then in the past days, how much money was spent on fuel. So this is not just fuel in general. This is not just solid fuel or biomass fuel. We're talking about fuel consumption in general for the household, because that's an important consideration when we're designing interventions to address household energy. And again, we're looking at what is the cost of the primary stove. How long has the primary stove been in use? In many cases, in these households who have very, very little money to spend, they may save up money for a stove, but we want to make sure that that investment lasts for a long time, or that we can find a solution that can ensure a more sustained approach instead of having a stove that perhaps they saved up a lot of money for, they purchased, that only last a year. So these are things that we need to know as we address household energy moving forward. And does the primary stove meet all the household cooking needs? This is somewhat similar to the secondary cooking stove, but it's important to know what is it, if that stove meets it, and if they just choose alternate stoves and fuels and technologies because of personal preference, or if it's just because the stove is unable to do everything they need to do at the same time. And then we've got how long does it take you to prepare the primary stove for cooking a meal. So does it take a long time to chop the wood, get it burning to an appropriate fuel, flame level, etc. Or tell me about the secondary cook stove used in the home, which is described. Again, these are these similar questions as to the primary that was in the core questions, but rather applied to the secondary. So I hope I didn't fly through that too quickly. But I wanted to make sure that we get our partners a chance to talk and we can really elaborate on the discussion. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over. If anyone has any questions, I think we may be taking questions at the end. So I'm online, ready to answer as needed.
Okay, so let's open it up to questions and comments here. I think we actually have one question in the room here that somebody wanted to ask, and perhaps if others can, I'm just going to unmute people so that they can also ask questions, but maybe it would be more helpful if people could just chat their question so that we can respond accordingly. So please chat your questions here, and we do have one that is just coming in right now. Just a second. Okay, so the question here from one of our colleagues is, where does information on generators fit into this, since those are also a major source of pollution in many areas? Heather, could you tell us where the generator data would come from? Would it be under electrification, or under, how would it, do you have any idea where it would fit?
Again, this is something that's very inconsistent across surveys. And in terms of generators, the most data we get, if we have anything related to generators, is in relation to lighting. But this is an important aspect to consider, particularly in relation to diesel generators. So they're a very important source of pollution in and around the home. So there's not a lot of data, but this is an important thing that perhaps we can capture when we're looking perhaps at lighting, or specifically we need to, in a supplemental question, we can have a supplemental question looking at, do you get electricity? If so, how is it generated? Is it from generator, et cetera? So thank you for raising that.
Yeah, because just in terms of pollution, if we're trying to think about how to, so thank you for raising that here, Donnie. Other questions from the public here before we move to our next presentation? Oh, there's a question from Verena here, and she asks how are quote-unquote clean and quote-unquote polluting fuels defined, and what should be the basis for that? Heather, you want to take that, please?
Sure. The clean and polluting is basically going to be defined on the indoor air quality guidelines, the emission rate targets associated with that. We haven't, most likely, because the data in terms of field measurements is low, we're going to have to be initially relying a lot on laboratory emissions, testing and what have you. But as we move forward and we get more field measurements, we'll be basing it on that. And so basically clean is going to be defined by cleaning. And the polluting is still a terminology we're still grappling with, because I mean, basically polluting and being the opposite of clean, and clean being defined by the WHO guidelines for household fuel combustion. And so it's based on the emission rate targets associated with that. So it's the fuel and technology combination that we have to look at.
Great. We have another question that's come in on the question and answers from GIZ, but in case people don't see it, it says, number one, it might be useful to check for ventilation, and I know that there are questions on ventilation related to this. It also says, number two, processed biomass needs to be explained further in the respective countries, and I think that's a great comment, and something that I think when we in the discussion when we talk about what kinds of tools we need in order to make sure that people are clear about what do we mean by processed biomass. Why don't we table that for discussion, because there also have some discussion that has come up about how to make sure that people, in terms of the translation, like charcoal versus coal, for example, and other kind of ways that we can think about what needs to be clearly explained to get the answers that we want. And then finally, there was another one saying that question number 8 might give confusing answers and will be difficult to answer. I believe that I think that refers to how long does it take you to prepare the primary stove for cooking a meal. So I don't know if, Heather, you have any comments on that one now, or whether we can come back to that. And that's one of the supplemental questions, so perhaps it hasn't. It is something that we need to kind of clarify in a little bit more detail. But if you have some comments on that now, Heather, quickly, and then I think that we should probably, in the interest of time, move on after that to Yvonne's presentation and table the rest of the discussion for the discussion section.
Okay, two quick comments. In regarding to the supplemental question, indeed, these supplemental questions were basically a comprehensive list of what various people had initially proposed. These have not been fine-tuned as the core questions with various inputs. So these were just kind of throw them out ideas on there. And I also wanted to bring up in relation to the processed fuel and this idea of what is processed fuel to varies. As this, one perhaps idea would be to develop, because I'm grappling this a lot with this guidelines right now, is the defining coal in the various translated languages. So developing perhaps a dictionary or a glossary of different terms for people to refer to and use on their various M&E measurement and measurement tools would be very helpful.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much, Heather, for a very, very insightful and comprehensive presentation. I think it's quite exciting to see how much has actually progressed since we first started meeting about this a couple of years ago, and particularly how many other different agencies and initiatives are now kind of part of this process of harmonization. It's quite, I think that there is a lot of momentum and a lot of opportunity, which really gives more importance to this issue of really, making sure that our indicators are well harmonized. For our next speaker, very pleased to welcome Dr. Yvonne Vera from UN Energy Secretariat to speak with us a little bit more about the SDGs and related indicators, and particularly just to walk through the development and consultation process. Now, Yvonne, I believe that you don't have any slides to present, but we are just going to now unmute you, and so really looking forward to hearing from you here.
Okay. Good morning or good afternoon to everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, very clearly. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, first of all, thank you very much to you, to Sumi and Heather for this invitation to participate in this webinar. The subject is indeed very interesting. And yeah, I'm sorry I don't have slides, but what I have to say is indeed kind of short. But anyway, about the Sustainable Development Goals effort, as most of you probably know, the final report of the Open Working Group of the United Nations General Assembly proposed a total of 17 Sustainable Development Goals and 169 targets. This was last year. These goals will replace the Millennium Development Goals, which expired this year. Now, the proposed set of Sustainable Development Goals includes a dedicated and standalone goal on energy. This is goal number 7, which is defined as ensuring access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all. The energy goal includes a total of 5 targets. 3 of these targets are the main targets, and they are indeed consistent with the 3 objectives of the Sustainable Energy for All initiative. The last 2 targets refer to the means of implementation. I'm just going to mention the first 3 targets because I think they are important for the discussion that we're having here. Target 7.1 is about ensuring universal access to affordable, reliable, and modern energy services by 2030. Target 7.2 is increase substantially the share of renewable energy in the global energy mix by 2030. Target 7.3 is about doubling the global rate of improvement in energy efficiency by 2030. Now, it's very, very important to understand that these SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals and targets, are not final. The negotiations on the SDGs and the corresponding targets have not finished yet. They will continue until the next session of the General Assembly, which is going to take place in September this year, in 2015. And in fact, in December last year, the Secretary General released his synthesis report called The Road to Dignity by 2030 to support the intergovernmental negotiations on the post-2015 development agenda. People were concerned about the possibility of this report recommending said. However, the report did not recommend any specific changes in the proposal, and instead it just suggested some elements to better communicate the proposed SDGs. Now, in January, the negotiations started again in January this year, 2015, and many member states have indicated their preference for not negotiating the SDG proposals from the Open Working Group. In other words, there is a lot of support for keeping the goals as they have been proposed. Nevertheless, some countries are calling for making the agenda more focused, prioritized, and easy to communicate. And this means that perhaps there may be a reduction in the number of targets, but we don't know for sure. So the negotiations are continuing this year, and it is expected that the summit of heads of state that will take place in September 2015 will then endorse the overall post-2015 development agenda, including the final set of Sustainable Development Goals and targets. Now let's talk a little bit about the indicators effort. In relation to the indicators, it was decided that the United Nations Statistical Commission will be the organization coordinating this effort. Now, what is the UN Statistical Commission? This is a mechanism that represents the highest entity of the global statistical system, and it includes the chief statisticians of all UN member states. The Secretariat of the Statistical Commission of this UN Statistical Commission is the UN Statistics Division, which is part of the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs. So, in mid-January, the UN Statistics Division issued a request to the technical support teams. There are these support teams that are supporting each of the 17 proposed SDGs. So the UN Statistics Division issued a request to this technical support team for a list of preliminary sets of indicators. And the request specified the criteria for indicator proposal. The criteria include the following. First of all, it should be a limited number of indicators. They mention no more than 100 or 120 indicators for all the SDGs, for the 17 SDGs. This means 5 to 7 indicators for each SDG. The indicator proposals also need to be directly linked to the specific targets that are being proposed. So you cannot just have an indicator if, on something that you think that is important, unless it's directly linked to a target that has been proposed. Another criteria is that indicators should be designed for global monitoring, and they should be relevant and of methodological soundness. They also need to be measurable, but at a reasonable effort and cost for national organization, and simple and easy to understand. So they don't want anything complex, anything too elaborated that people will not understand. So based on the different criteria and the request, we drafted a table with a list of proposed indicators specifically for the energy SDG. And this was prepared with colleagues involved in the global tracking framework, in particular the World Bank, and also colleagues from other organizations, such as the UN Statistics Division, UN Energy Secretariat, DESA, the Executive Office of the Secretary General, and UNDP. And the proposed table was circulated to members of UN Energy and also members of the Energy Technical Support Team. The list of proposals for the energy SDG after circulating to all its members grew considerably, with proposals from different organizations. A lot of people would like to see a lot of what we call here nexus indicators, like connection between energy and food security, or energy and water, and also a lot of disaggregation per gender, age, etc. So we submitted this compilation, the proposal with the table with the original proposal plus all the other proposals that were submitted by other agencies. But I'd like to mention just the two major indicators for target 1 of the energy SDG, which is what I believe is the target most relevant for the discussions that we're having here today. The target is defined to ensure universal access to affordable, reliable, and modern energy services by 2030. So the two major indicators that are being proposed for this target are the indicator number 1 is the percentage of population with electricity access, and indicator number 2 is the percentage of population with primary reliance on clean fuels and technologies. At first, the indicator 2 was proposed in terms of percentage of population with primary reliance on non-solid fuels. This was based on the global tracking framework effort. But after discussions with WHO and the World Bank, the proposal was modified to primary reliance on clean fuels and technologies. So, what are the next steps? Well, what we're expecting here is that the proposed set of indicators will be circulated to all chiefs of national statistics offices for comments. And we're expecting 2 meetings this week here in New York, organized by the UN Statistics Division. And the meetings will be to talk about the key elements and principles for the development and design of the indicators framework for the post-2015 development agenda. The Statistical Commission will propose and may eventually or soon, because all the goals, there's a lot of indicators were proposed, a lot more than what they would like to have at the end. So, but the Commission, the Statistical Commission, will need to wait until September 2015, because it is not until September 2015 when the General Assembly will make a final decision of the official set of Sustainable Development Goals and targets. Once that decision is made, then the Statistical Commission will prepare a final set of indicators for recommendation to the General Assembly, and this recommendation we're expecting that must be delivered by the end of 2015. And then the representatives of member states in the General Assembly will have from January to September 2016 to discuss and agree on the final set of indicators. So, as you can see, it's a very, very complicated story, and it's not easy, here, because there's so many people involved and so many different organizations, and so it's still difficult, but very difficult, and it is a process that is continuing and not ending soon. So, but this is all the information I have at this point. Back to you, Sumi.
Yes, thank you very, very much. That was very, very comprehensive and quite informative. Maybe why don't we see if we can take one or two questions for clarification now, and then perhaps hold the rest until the discussion section, just to make sure that Elisa has adequate time to chat. Any questions, anyone? Okay. I don't see any questions popping up. So maybe I'll in the meantime, let's put up Elisa's slide, and then if any questions come in, otherwise we'll go ahead and move to Elisa. Okay, so without further ado, I'm very, very pleased to welcome Dr. Elisa Pozzolo of the Global LPG Partnership, who's going to give us really a description of some of the work that we really have, applied work in progress, on how you integrate harmonized core and supplemental questions when tracking household energy markets. Elisa, welcome, and thank you for joining.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. So with my presentation, I'd like to give some initial remarks and then really telling you about the experience from the field that we have been doing as part of one of our projects. And in terms of remarks, I would like to say, can you hear me?
Yeah, Elisa,
all guests have been unmuted.
There's a slight bit of echo. We could hear you much clearer earlier when we were testing, so I don't know if you could go back to doing whatever you were doing before. That would be great.
All guests have been muted. All guests have been unmuted. All guests have been unmuted. All guests have been muted.
Can you hear me now?
All
Okay,
guests
Lisa,
have been unmuted.
Whoever is doing the muting and unmuting, if you could stop that, it would be really helpful. For lack of a more polite way to say it. Elisa, can you go ahead and try to say something again?
Sorry. Let's hold 1 second.
Is it better?
One more time.
Just a second. Elisa, hold on. We're
all
going to
guests
remute
have been
everybody.
muted.
Okay, now please go ahead.
Okay, let's see if it works now. Is it better?
Yeah, much better. Thank you.
Okay, brilliant. Okay. So just to briefly say a couple of initial remarks, it's really that integrating harmonized questions into pre-commercial and commercial efforts as aimed at promoting clean and safe household energy can contribute to more effective commercial planning, as well as facilitate future independent monitoring evaluations for new user populations. Indeed, understanding the household energy needs and patterns can support the planning of scaling up cleaner cooking solutions and fuels, such as LPG, biogas, and other performing stoves, which are much needed alternatives to be offered to people exposed to household air pollution. And related to this, we've started a project a few months ago, and this project is entitled Innovative Business Models to Increase LPG Penetration and Use in Rural India. And for those of you who are not familiar with our organization, the project is implemented by the Global LPG Partnership, which is a public-private partnership established in 2012 as an official initiative under Sustainable Energy for All. The Global LPG Partnership was created to partner with countries to plan and implement the necessary regulatory and industry reforms and business models for rapid, sustainable, and large-scale national transition to LPG for solid fuels in developing countries. And now the other partners is the Self-Employed Women's Association of India, which is a women empowerment network and trade union established in 1972 with almost 2 million members. So in September this year, we met in Gujarat, in India, to plan, evaluate and mobilize villages for rural LPG projects programs in the area. As described here in this next slide, the project, the overall goal is to increase penetration and safe use of LPG in rural communities, which are not currently served by state oil companies or private sector LPG companies. Why am I telling all of this? Because really it was important for us, as part of our planning for the project and the establishment of the LPG businesses, to develop a survey tool and a data collection who can really gather the information that we've been discussing today. And in fact, we have approached the WHO to ask for some of these current supplemental questions that we incorporated into our data collection. The survey the data gathering started a few weeks ago, so we don't really have final results yet to share. But there are already several aspects of the tool of the survey that have emerged and which I would like to share today. Just giving you another brief overview about the survey that we've used. This was comprised of a set of 3 modules subdivided into sections. And this household energy use section incorporated the proposed harmonized core questions, which were given to us very kindly by WHO. And the section on time and fuel saving incorporated some of the supplemental questions. And then the module on LPG included 2 separate sections for LPG users and non-users. And these were designed with inputs from other project partners, including the Centers for Disease and Control and Prevention and the University of British Columbia, Monitoring and Evaluation. So going back to the list of the core questions, some of these you've seen already in Heather's presentation. On the first one, what is the primary or main cooking fuel? So as you can see in India, the fact that dyed fuel was included as one of the options was very important, because in this country, dyed fuel could easily be one of the primary cooking fuel sources to be used from some of the households. And then moving on to the second core question, as Edith said, the original question was, what type of fuels are used for cooking? But as she explained, we actually used the more refined question, which is, what is your secondary cooking fuel or energy source? And in addition to that, taking into account the fuel stacking, that as you know means the use of multiple fuels and stoves is a very common phenomenon, it's not the norm. In almost every country and setting, we actually added an extra question, which is highlighted in blue, which asks, tell me which stove do you own and in which season do you use it. And we thought this was important because in some countries, in India for example, there are seasonal differentiation which are important to capture. And so we have included these questions, and as you can see, even if it's a bit small, in blue on the left side column, we put some very typical name like traditional chula, which is the typical Indian name for stove. And then we added another few stove options called fiber-made stove, which is a stove option diffused in the region where we are conducting our study. Moving on to another of the core questions. Tell me about your primary or main stove. Which of these describe the stove? The original version, which is different from what Heather showed today, included also an option for kerosene. As you can see, the F is highlighted in red, so the difference with pressurized versus pressurized kerosene stoves. When we did the pilot of the survey, these options were found difficult for people to understand. So probably some pictorial illustrations of the 2 stove models could have helped, but we simply did not include these 2 options in the final survey. Moving on, We included and we considered really the questions on lighting and space heating as the core questions. We felt these were very important questions to be asked. And so the question on lighting was, what is your primary source of energy for lighting? And the question for heating, what is your primary heating fuel? And then as part of the supplementary questions, we also asked about the secondary source of energy for lighting, for example. And as Heather explained, this is really important because even if a family uses a clean fuel or a device for cooking, but then keeps burning biomass for heating needs or uses very inefficient and polluting lighting sources, the exposure to hazard air pollution will remain high, and the overall health benefits from clean cooking are almost entirely lost. So finally, the last remark I want to add from our experience in the field, and that we added this as part of the supplemental questions, and these questions read, how do you usually obtain the fuel needed for cooking? And we know that this could be mostly collected or purchased, or a mix of both of them. But again, as there are several seasonal variation in many settings, we felt it was important to capture these differences according to the different seasons, so the rainy, the winter, and the summer season. So, in conclusion, really, based on our field experience of testing these core and supplemental questions as part of the GLPGP SEWA project, these are our recommendations. Firstly, that it's really important to have these harmonized and synchronized questions. Take into account that there are translation needs. So sometimes this survey could be translated into main national languages, but also into dialects. So it is important to take into account these translations variations. So for example, we support the idea of having a glossary of terms to describe the type of stoves and fuel, for example, supported by some particular illustrations, because this could help especially in interviewing less educated respondents. Also, we recommend to always include local stove and fuel options in order to fully creation. These could be also recorded to the open answer, others please specify. So in addition, we recommend also that there's 1 or 2 harmonized core questions which can capture the fuel stacking based on seasonal variation for cooking tasks. And then thirdly, we recommend always to include the heating and lighting questions as part of the core questions. And lastly, on a more general consideration, is to promote the integration of harmonized household energy core questions also into market-based approaches and more to evaluation of local initiatives to complement a supplement self-contained study project. And I think our experience really showed how it was helpful perhaps to have to make use of these questions. So thank you everyone for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Elisa. I think in the interest of time, we should probably move pretty quickly to Mikul's presentation about the update on the CIFA tracking process. I did have one quick question for you on practical terms, which is how long did it take your field investigators to actually go and collect all the information on household energy use in the SEWA project?
So the SEWA project, actually, the questionnaire was a bit longer. So, of course, there was a different module. And in total, it took about 25 minutes for all the modules. That means there was about 5 to 8 minutes to ask the core questions and plus about the supplemental questions. 5 to 8 minutes. Okay, that's very helpful. Okay, so then I think without further ado, and I apologize, I think, Elisa had a formal presentation, so we jumped ahead to do that, but by no means are we kind of minimizing our interest in hearing from Dr. Mikul Bhatia, who is a Senior Energy Specialist at the World Bank. He's going to give us now an update on the multi-tier framework for measuring access to cooking solutions from the CIFA process now. Mikul, are you there?
Yes, I'm there. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, very clearly, thank you. And also, just to clarify for those of you who are wondering, Mikul is actually, like Yvonne, going to speak with, the system is functioning as expected.
to share any under development over the last couple of years. As Ivan mentioned, that only summary indicators can be accommodated in the Sustainable Development Goals. Nonetheless, for a lot of sector practitioners, it is important to have more detailed information as well as detailed metrics to be able to measure what their contribution towards expanding access has been. And the Global Tracking Framework 2013 suggested an approach using multi-tier frameworks for measuring the household's experience or the user's experience of energy access as against measuring the metrics suggested by either the supplier or metrics pertaining to the specific instruments used. The activity has been divided into 3 phases. The first phase was to develop the conceptual underpinnings for defining and measuring access to energy. The second phase was to pilot these approaches in select countries, availing any available opportunity. And then the third phase was, once the approach has been validated, to pilot surveys, then to conduct a global survey, which would basically give the detailed baseline for measuring the sustainable energy for all goals, particularly on energy access. In the first part of the exercise, defining and measuring energy access, the conceptual framework has been available for quite some time now. It has been prepared for 3 different locales of energy use: the households, productive users, and community users. And this extends beyond cooking. This goes into electricity, cooking, fuels, everything at these 3 different locales: households, productive users, and community institutions. And on the household electricity access, which is a sub-locale within households, there's been clarity for the last couple of years how that will be done. On the productive and community users also, we have proceeded with preparing the full methodology. On the cooking side as well, we have the methodology in place, but it requires some confirmation with WHO, particularly in light of the WHO indoor air quality guidelines that have been recently issued. We believe that our approach is consistent with that, but we are awaiting a confirmation over the next hopefully few days or few weeks. We should be able to secure that. In parallel, apart from creating the multi-tier framework, we have also created the questionnaire for conducting the field surveys to obtain all of this information. As you may know, the multi-tier framework involves different attributes of energy access, including availability, convenience, capacity of the equipment, then the convenience aspects, the health aspects, safety aspects, legality of access, and so on. Particularly on cooking, the health aspects, convenience, and safety, as well as availability, become very important. So questionnaire has been designed to collect information on all of this. And this first exercise on creating the conceptual framework is likely to be completed in the next 1 month or so. We have the final report with us, which is being currently reviewed internally, and hopefully in the next few weeks, we should be able to release the report. We are also anticipating to release this report ahead of the GTF 2015. GTF 2015 is targeted for 19th of May. So hopefully by end April or early May, the final report on defining and measuring energy access would be released. The second part of the exercise, which relates to piloting the multi-tier approaches, involved running certain pilot surveys and running the multi-tier analysis on the data obtained. And this has been done across select areas in multiple countries, including Uganda, DRC, select districts in Bihar, in India, Ethiopia, and Malawi. So the survey instrument has been tested, the data obtained has been applied to the multi-tier framework, and the multi-tier thresholds have been reviewed, and so on. And going forward, we expect to apply it as a pilot in at least 2 more contexts, one in Mali and one in Guinea, but there could be more. Using this entire data, we prepare what is called as the Energy Access Diagnostic Report, which looks at information such as, in context of cooking, it would look at information such as what is the size of the kitchen, what are the openings for ventilation, what is the type of cook stove, including whether or not it has a chimney or a hood, and so on, what is the duration of cooking, including the start time and end time, typical start time, end time for each meal preparation. What are the convenience aspects, which includes how much time does it take to collect and process the fuel, how much time does it take to initiate the stove, and so on. So the piloting exercise is now nearing completion. We did a full review in Malawi, and the results of that are being compiled. We expect to do that in the next couple of months. And then we are planning to launch the 3rd phase, which is a global survey. By global, I mean covering roughly about 30 to 40 key countries which have access deficit. As expected, most of these countries would fall in sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, and East Asia. But some would also fall, apart from these, some would also fall in Latin America and other parts of the world. For the global survey, we already have funds allocated from SMAP to cover a significant part of the survey, but not all. And then we are reaching out to ADB, AFDB, the Scaling Up Renewable Energy Program, the SE for All Technical Assistance Program, and other such programs to be able to synergize the financing required and to be able to cover so many countries. And when we cover so many countries, it would essentially capture about 70 to 80% of unconnected, grid unconnected households using solid biomass. Okay. This year, and we hope to complete the data collection process over the next 8 to 9 months thereafter. This survey would basically form, a one-time baseline. And probably every 3 to 4 years, we intend to do similar surveys, provided the first one goes successfully. The results of the survey would be included in GTF 2017, which will be the GTF after this one. So that's the broad overview of where we stand. And also to reiterate that on the cooking side, I think there is a broad convergence happening across, how all of us are taking it forward. So the alignment of the survey instrument would be an important step. And although we have tested our instrument in several countries, we remain open to aligning it as needed with, whatever the alliance and other partners come up with. So with that, I would like to, close my presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mikul. This was very informative and quite exciting to hear the update in terms of what you have planned moving forward. And I think especially the opportunity to do a large-scale survey across a range of things, it's really good that you have this in planning and that we can also be chatting across all of us to make sure to see how we can kind of also increase the coverage over those countries versus, other countries that would be addressed, for example. So I totally agree with you that it's good that we're all in on the same conversation to make sure that we're well, correlated. So we just got a message here from Marlise mentioning that there will be a meeting organized by KfW on the 6th of March in Frankfurt to continue this discussion of various cooking energy monitoring indicators. Thank you, Marlise. And so we should certainly circle back with Heather and Mikul and Ivan and the rest of us on the phone to make sure that we can also see how best to participate and coordinate with those who are working on the March 6th meeting. So with that, perhaps we can now move into presentation, the discussion section of this. First, Marlies, would you like to perhaps just say a word or two about the KFW meeting so that we can get a better idea of what types of things would be covered during the meeting?
Okay, I can.
Marlies,
Yeah, can you hear me?
yes, we can hear you.
Okay. There's a meeting on 6th of January, an all-day meeting on the various energy access indicators. So World Bank is there, GSZ is there, and actually sort of with the experience which has been done through, from our side, from GSZ side, through the NDEF program, and then with what the World Bank is doing with the about the indicators. So there will be a discussion on that. There will be specific workshops, 2 hours workshops, to try to harmonize the indicators to explain the experience that has been seen so far. So unfortunately, it's a Friday, and the work on these tests will be 1:15 German time. So I don't know how we can make sure that people who are not attending personally can attend
Yeah, so it's a little bit difficult to hear you, Marlies, but I believe that you said that the meeting was going to be at 1:15. This section on the would be at 1:15 German time. Is that right?
on the cooking energy.
On the cooking energy. So it would be great if perhaps if you can. Because I'm sure that there would be people who are here that would be interested in finding a way of participating if possible. So it would be great. It's really exciting that you have this meeting, that we should just make sure to continue that we're all well coordinated. And I know that GSZ, of course, has a lot of these activities ongoing, so it would be good. We have to make sure that we're integrated with that as well.
Yes, the indicator has gone out to most of those who are participating in today's call. Except for WHO, I think I will send it to Heather as well.
Great, that's wonderful. Thank you very much. And yes, and Mikul has just indicated that Dana would be there from the World Bank side. So this is very exciting that this conversation is kind of continuing. And so with that, perhaps we should now talk. We have very little time, but if people have some things to raise in the discussion, I think that it would be really very useful. I mean, one thing that I would just like to mention is it seems quite clear that we should try to organize a small kind of work group that's really devoted to this issue of kind of what types of tools we're going to need in order to better kind of communicate as we develop these core and supplemental questions in terms of the best way of sharing out information, in terms of some graphical representation, or what are the key things that people may find confusing that need to be, kind of better and more clearly articulated. But Heather, perhaps if you want to lead off a little bit on that, we have very little time now, but lead off on a little bit of this discussion. Heather?
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes. Okay. You were fading out of there for a second there, so I didn't catch the last sentence of what you were saying. But I could you just repeat, because the line is bad and I'm not sure why.
I was just going to say that we should certainly try to have a small work group or something to talk about in more detail about the tools in terms of what would be useful, particularly as we think about communicating the survey instrument kind of module in country. What would be useful, as we heard from Elisa and others in terms of some of the confusions about the different additional options, but having some pictorial representation where needed and things like that. I think it would be really useful to kind of have those who are interested involved in kind of a subgroup to focus in a little bit more on that.
I agree entirely, and I think it would be great, and WHO would be happy to go ahead with the Alliance, and we can go ahead and spear this group. Maybe perhaps we could do an e-discussion, or we need to set up a meeting where we can really get these partners to get face-to-face and engage to finalize
Sure.
it. So if you guys are interested, please, go ahead.
Yeah, and Heather, also I was thinking that, I think that it's great that there's this opportunity to kind of continue this discussion with a different kind of a different group of members in addition on March 6th. So perhaps we can also think about communicating there. I guess Elise indicated that you should be receiving an invitation for that workshop as well.
Okay, that would be great. Yes, I think it would be good. And please, anyone feel free. I'm sorry, I should have put my email on my presentation. I apologize. But please, maybe we can circulate it. Be happy to. Please feel free to send me an email with any questions, or if you have any input or suggestions on what I present to partners.
Yes. And what we'll do is very quickly all the webinar material available on our show, and that way at least people can use it as kind of an initial starting point perhaps for the March 6th meeting as well.
Sumi? I don't know if I'm still
Yes?
muted.
No, you're here. We can hear you.
Okay. And yes, after you send that back, if people do have any suggestions or any inputs that they would just like to submit electronically regarding what, at least for the core questions we've already had some input from various actors, that would be really great because I think we need to keep moving that on. So please feel free to email me and I'll try to incorporate and we can keep this dialogue going as we move forward.
Okay, and we have we'll wait for people's comments on the public chat area so it'll be easy for people to see the discussion clearly. And it looks like we're not getting very many or any comments in at the moment, but perhaps people are just thinking about this and we can kind of go ahead and continue the conversation moving forward. Go ahead, Heather.
I was just thinking it would be very useful actually to get a more, if people could actually, I know it looks like we've got a number of implementing partners on the line. If they could, just to start at least this dictionary or this glossary of fuel terms and stove terms used in their area, it'd be great if we could start getting kind of a list so we can start developing that glossary because it is going to vary a lot depending upon what area and region you're working.
Yes, and I think that we should probably, that's a great suggestion, Heather, and I think that we can do a more widespread consultation actually across our partners working in different places to get maybe a better sense, perhaps even through the results reporting process to make sure that we have, all of the categories. And of course, just got a chat in from Mikul, and I'm very grateful that as always the World Bank is, committed to being very collaborative here and that they're very pleased to partner with various agencies for this global survey. So, thanks, Mikul, for that. Just guarantee that we continue to work together from here on out, which is great. And I'm sure that others would be happy as well. Okay, well, I don't see any other chats coming in. So with that, I think we'd really like to thank everybody for participating on the webinar. I know that there are several people that were interested in joining and who we would really, and others who I think we really need to get a broader set of kind of feedback from. So we will continue this conversation. We'll circulate this information about the webinar publicly on our website. But if people have, colleagues that they would like to share this with, of course, please do get them in the loop. There's sometimes so many things happening that things can, of course, slip through the cracks. But we'd love to have everybody's kind of continued coordination and collaboration on this. And really looking forward to, kind of continuing this conversation in the near future. Marlise is asking about whether we get a list of the participations on this call. We can try to put something together like that based on what we have and send that across to you, of course, as well. Okay, so then without further ado, I'd like to thank everybody for joining in the webinar and really looking forward to continuing this conversation with everyone.
Thank you.
Okay, okay, bye-bye. Thank you, everyone, and thanks to all of the speakers.
talking, and this is, I don't know